Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to the Attic. In this video, which is the first in a series of 6 rebuttals, I'll be sharing my thoughts on the 2023 Exercise Patience Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. For the uninitiated, Jehovah's Witnesses hold regional conventions on an annual basis over the course of 3 days, a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Each day is split into 2 sessions, a morning session and an afternoon session. So this year, as in previous years, I'll be giving you the highlights of each session as a separate rebuttal, meaning there will be 6 rebuttals for this year's convention in total. Anyway, as you can imagine, we have a lot to get through. So without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
It's wonderful that we can be together for this year's Exercise Patience Convention. It's been 4 years since we've had an in-person regional convention. Your patience in waiting for this day will be rewarded. Speaking for the governing body, I can say that this will be an excellent program for all of us to enjoy. We'll benefit from over 40 talks, as well as videos, a dramatic Bible reading, and a 2-part feature-length drama. And all of this is designed to build us up and to help us endure the remaining days of this old world. When a patient person is wronged or provoked, he remains calm as he awaits the outcome of the situation. Additionally, patience is a quality that must be shown in all circumstances, not just when enduring an offense, a hardship, or a trial. We must exercise patience in everyday situations, with one's spouse and children, with aging parents and other relatives, with friends in the congregation, in public, as when sharing in the ministry, when in line at a store, or when driving a vehicle in traffic. Can you see why this aspect of the fruitage of the Spirit is especially necessary now? Please give your full attention to the entire program. Follow along in the Bible. Take note of the points that especially touch your heart. And know that we on the governing body love you all and continue to pray that you will keep on patiently enduring to the end.
We've just been hearing from governing body member Mark Sanderson, who's been giving some introductory comments as part of the first item on the Friday morning session, Chairman's Address, Why Exercise Patience. It's a little bit odd how they have essentially 2 introductions to a convention. It's the chairman's job, the chairman of the convention, to welcome the audience and to encourage them to give close attention to the program. But in recent years, the organization has focused more and more on video propaganda and on, quite frankly, getting the governing body integrated into the convention through videos. So you have this weird double welcome whereby it's not just the convention chairman welcoming the audience, they also have to have a governing body member pop up and appear and explain why the theme of the convention is so relevant and welcome the audience and remind the audience how loved they are. So hopefully you all feel very loved after Mark Sanderson's comments. As regards what he was saying there about being able to take offense, I think this speaks directly to why the organization has so many problems with child sexual abuse.
When a patient person is wronged or provoked, he remains calm as he awaits the outcome of the situation. Additionally, patience is a quality that must be shown in all circumstances, not just when enduring an offense, a hardship, or a trial.
So if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you need to demonstrate your ability to exercise patience through being wronged and through suffering offenses against you, confident that at some point Jehovah is going to make things right for you. That's in essence what Mark Sanderson has just been saying there. And you can understand how that sort of attitude, that sort of complacency, and just shifting the problem heavenward for God to fix in his own sweet time, you can understand how that would lead to child sexual abuse being covered up and victims thinking, okay, I need to be wronged. I need to suffer an offense because clearly it's not the right time for my abuser to face justice. God is going to make sure that my abuser faces justice eventually. I need to allow myself to be wronged. That's the toxic mentality that lies at the heart of Jehovah's Witness culture when it comes to their handling of abuse. And it very clearly serves the leadership in terms of preserving the reputation of their organization rather than serving the needs of survivors.
I wish I was a grown-up already.
Do you? There's so much to learn in becoming a grown-up.
I hate waiting. Can't Jehovah just make me grow up faster?
Good things take time to grow. Jehovah made us to live forever. He put eternity in our hearts. August. Take a look at these trees. They were already big when your mom and I were your age. But the stream is watering them, making them grow stronger and taller. I know you want to grow up, and you'll get there. Just walk with Jehovah and enjoy the journey.
Dad. Dad. Have you seen my ball? Thanks.
I'm gonna get ready for the day, okay?
Okay. Growing up, August felt like he didn't have any friends in the congregation. But recently, he's been using his time to cultivate a friendship with Ben.
Hey, Ben.
Good kid, new to the congregation. I can't shake the feeling things have been tough for him at home for a long time. They've got a great group of friends. Harlan, Chantel, and Mallory. She's applied for SKE a number of times, but hasn't been invited yet. Funny. It can be so easy to size up everybody else's life, except your own. It's been years since I've lost my privileges. Brothers, I completely understand the decision. And I fully support it.
Savior, we know that you can serve again someday.
Will I ever be useful again?
We've just been watching a dramatization from the first symposium of the 2023 Exercise Patience Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. The symposium has the theme there is an appointed time for everything. And this particular dramatization is encouraging Jehovah's Witnesses to show patience in the area of ambition and privileges, and also later on we're going to see dealing with anger. But you can see there this weird focus on Jehovah's Witnesses extending themselves within the organization and reaching out for privileges.
Harlan, Chantel, and Mallory. She's applied for SKE a number of times, but hasn't been invited yet.
Oh dear, Mallory has applied for SKE a number of times, but hasn't been accepted yet. So this, for me, illustrates just how lacking in self-awareness the organization is, considering the fact that they are expecting to have non-Jehovah's Witnesses in the audience, buying into the idea that they're attending some kind of generic self-help seminar on cultivating patience. It's not about being patient regarding the end of the world and wanting Armageddon to come. It's just a generic being patient when you're waiting in line at the store, being patient when you're in traffic, as Mark Sanderson said earlier. It's just being patient in general. It's nothing specific about Jehovah's Witness end-time doomsday beliefs. They've promoted this convention to people who don't have the foggiest idea what SKE is, so that people will be sat in the audience scratching their heads thinking, I don't understand what SKE is. It must be something really, really important or significant or relevant for them to be dedicating this glossy, well-produced dramatization to a character who's struggling to get in. There's nothing unique about it. It's just a training course that goes on for a number of weeks that makes you more useful to the Jehovah's Witness organization. That's all it is. But because they're almost running out of ideas here, we've reached the point where in successive conventions, they've done dramatizations touching on pretty much everything you could possibly consider in the sphere of Jehovah's Witness culture, including last year infighting among elders. Even that got a number of dramatizations. They're just scraping the bottom of the barrel at this point. So this particular dramatization is focusing, at least in part, on frustrations over not getting privileges or losing privileges, as in the case of Xavier, who is narrating. He is an elder who was deleted or had to stand down, and it's clearly a source of great pain for him, poor thing. He doesn't get to have a position of authority in his local congregation. Again, just not relevant. It's not the sort of thing you make dramatizations about or produce glossy films or TV series about, but it's important to Jehovah's Witnesses, so we all have to sit through this. But for me, probably the most triggering part was that conversation between Xavier and his son August when August was still a child.
I know you want to grow up, and you'll get there. Just walk with Jehovah and enjoy the journey.
Just walk with Jehovah and enjoy the journey. Because if you don't, I may be forced to shun you at some future point. That's what it all boils down to, isn't it? What choice will August realistically have when he grows up, other than to walk with Jehovah if he wants to have a relationship with his father?
Well, to grow strong, a tree needs the right environment. It needs nourishment from the soil, warm sunlight, and refreshing water. Well, strong friendships also need this environment. It needs a soil of mutual understanding and shared experiences to be able to talk about personal things with someone we know can understand. It needs the warmth of heart-to-heart communication. Yes, even we men need to be able to open our hearts up to friends. And it needs to be refreshed by genuine trust and unselfish actions. Now, some of you have grown up in a more digital environment, online schooling, Zoom, electronic devices. So it may seem easier or even normal to develop friends in a digital world, mainly on social media. But do hundreds of friends or followers on social media provide the same environment we just described of heart-to-heart communication, genuine trust, unselfish actions, especially if we never meet? No. Friends on social media are like plastic trees. It's true, they don't take time to really develop or to grow, but they don't provide the protection, support, and love that we need. They're not the true friends of Proverbs 17:17.
No, for true friends, you need to go to Jehovah's Witnesses, who will, of course, shun you if you ever stop believing as they do. So we've been listening to Thomas Allen Jr., who is part of the Warwick, New York Bethel family. In other words, he works at the world headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses. Basically, most of these talks are being given by Bethel representatives, by people who work in the Jehovah's Witness facilities, specifically in the New York area where the organization is based. So Thomas Allen Jr. isn't a governing body member, isn't a governing body helper as far as I know. He's just working in the same place that they work. And this is basically a model convention that's being chosen to go out to all Jehovah's Witnesses who can't make it for whatever reason to the conventions in person. Anyway, just fascinating to hear him talking there without even a hint of irony about how friends on social media aren't as good as the friends you can make among Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't think anyone wouldn't argue that friendships that you develop in real life are always going to be far more meaningful than social media friends and, by extension, social media followers. You're always going to be limited when it comes to interacting with people digitally, especially people you've never met, versus people who you get to meet in real life and hang out with. That's something that practically everyone's going to agree with. But as for this fake plastic trees nonsense, well, I can't think of anything more fake than a friend who will only extend love and kindness and solidarity so long as you believe as they do. I would rather have a social media follower or a social media friend who I've never met, who values me for who I am, and who will be there regardless of a difference of opinion or a difference in religious belief. I would rather have that than surround myself with artificial Jehovah's Witness friends whose idea of love, the love that never fails, is to drop you like a ton of bricks the moment you stop believing as they do.
Now you're just walking away as you
everything okay?
It's Ben. He's been ignoring me. What did I do?
Maybe you didn't do anything. Ever think he may be dealing with something? You know, he may need a friend more than ever, even if it doesn't seem like it. Take a look at Proverbs 17:17.
A true friend shows love at all times. At all times. A true friend is a brother born for times of distress and shows patience when it's hard to understand a friend's actions. It can be easier to make a friend than to keep a friend. That takes patience and time.
Hey.
Hey, great to see you.
Hey, listen. I really wanted to say thank you.
Don't even worry about it. Ready to play?
Ready?
We've just been watching a dramatization from the Friday morning session of the 2023 Pursue Peace Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. The theme of the symposium, there is an appointed time for everything. This particular dramatization or episode of the series comes in the talk, Building Friendships Takes Time. Again, I'm not sure Jehovah's Witnesses are in that strong a position to brag about the uniqueness of their friendships, given the fact that friendship in the Jehovah's Witness religion is conditional on everyone being on the same page and everyone recognizing the authority of the governing body. And it's not just the conditional nature of friendships that's a problem, it's also the fact that they're compulsory. So you have to be friends with everybody in your congregation. The only reason why you can withhold your friendship or withhold kindness and interest in someone is if they're doing something wrong. If they're doing everything right, if they're attending all of the meetings and going on the ministry regularly, and you're not involving them in your life in some way, then there's a problem with you. So it's all a little bit messed up. And I guess I resent the way this dramatization implies that the only way you can cultivate meaningful friendships is through the Jehovah's Witness religion. That's manifestly not the case. It's an insult to all of the billions of non-Jehovah's Witnesses to suggest otherwise. Clearly, people outside of this religion are cultivating meaningful, lasting friendships without having to get their Bibles out now and then and turn to random verses in Proverbs. And I also found it interesting how Ben is clearly in a very, very dysfunctional family. You're even wondering whether there might be some domestic violence going on there. There's certainly verbal abuse going on, an awful lot of shouting, and yet apparently this is just something that Ben needs to talk through with August, his friend. Oh, I'm going to just drop by and we can hang out a bit and he can get everything off his chest. Well, something's badly, badly wrong in this family. And yet apparently it's nothing really, which makes you ask the question, how are Jehovah's Witness families anything unique if they're even showing in a convention dramatization different families in a congregation where one family with a young guy who's attending the meetings, his parents, they're at each other's throats?
Here are 4 suggestions. Number 1, help your student to examine his motives. If not careful, a student could be studying the Bible with a little bit of a selfish motive, maybe just to simply gain more and more knowledge, or to gain the approval of others. Number 2, teach your student not to just love the wisdom in the Bible, but to love its author, Jehovah. Love for Jehovah is the best fertilizer for spiritual growth. Number 3, teach your student how to meditate and do deep research. This will help him to better understand and imitate Jehovah's way of thinking. And finally, number 4, let your student make his own decisions. If we impose our decisions on our Bible student, that would be like a farmer who impatiently grabs onto a young stalk of grain and pulls up on it, as if that would make it grow faster. That would be ridiculous and detrimental to the crop.
We've just been listening to Jared Lopes, a Bethelite from the Warwick, New York headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses. He is giving the symposium item, "There is an appointed time for everything. Spiritual growth takes time." And Jared is giving his audience 4 top tips on how to help their Bible students to grow spiritually. Apparently, they need to examine the motives, make sure that the person isn't studying with Jehovah's Witnesses for ulterior motives, such as to gain knowledge, because we all know that Jehovah's Witnesses are a font of knowledge, and people will just study with them purely for academic purposes. So, okay, they also are concerned about motives in terms of people doing it to please others, which actually I think is quite realistic. I think lots of people, particularly young people who have Jehovah's Witness parents, will study with Jehovah's Witnesses to make other people happy. So it's interesting that they're highlighting this issue of motives when practically every young person who studies, who is raised in a Jehovah's Witness family, is doing it because they don't really feel like they have any other choice. Point number 2, teach them to love Jehovah. Apparently, love for Jehovah is like fertilizer or manure, you could say. The more fertilizer, I mean love for Jehovah, you apply, the more the student is going to grow spiritually. Students also need to be taught to meditate and do research. Well, meditation in a Jehovah's Witness context isn't really what meditation is for everyone else. It's nothing to do with kind of breathing exercises and clearing your mind and being at one with the universe and that kind of thing. Meditation, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, is just reading either the Jehovah's Witness Bible or Jehovah's Witness literature again and again and again, and really going overboard in trying to apply what you're reading to you personally, or find some kind of profound truth in whatever sentence or paragraph you're reading from the publications. That's essentially what meditation is in a Jehovah's Witness context. And research, well, it's ironic that he's encouraging Bible students to do research, or he's encouraging Jehovah's Witnesses to get their students to do research. I think if they were to do objective research, that would end the study. If they were to study in outside resources, if they were to look into, objectively what the Jehovah's Witness religion is all about and listen to testimonials from people who've had negative experiences with the organization, if they were to, look into the media reports, if they were to look into the court cases around child abuse, the various government inquiries and investigations that have been taking place, I think that would probably, again, bring the study to an end. But again, research in a Jehovah's Witness context means something a bit different. It means only reading Jehovah's Witness literature. Read it again, read it ad nauseum, until just through repetition, everything is just kind of stuck in your head and controlling everything in your life. And as for that fourth one about letting your student make decisions, how did he say this with a straight face?
Let your student make his own decisions. If we impose our decisions on our Bible student, that would be like a farmer who impatiently grabs onto a young stalk of grain and pulls up on it, as if that would make it grow faster.
So yes, apparently people studying with Jehovah's Witnesses are free to make their own decisions. Who knew? It's all just down to personal choice. You can just pretty much do what you want. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you need to let your student do what they want in their own way and in their own time. Only that's clearly not how it works when you're studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. And I couldn't help but remember this particular story, which was from the October 2021 JW broadcasting.
Cecilia was attending meetings regularly, but instead of a skirt, she wore pants to the meeting. So I chatted to Nancy, a sister who at the time was accompanying me to her study most weeks, so that we could try and figure out a way of helping her to make the change she needed to make. It took about a year of gently showing pictures, reviewing the Bible principles, but eventually she did get the point.
So I guess my question would be, which is it, Jared? Are we supposed to allow students to do what they want? Are we supposed to give them free rein to make decisions on basic things such as what clothes they wear to the meeting? Or are we supposed to, as we've been shown in this testimonial from 2021, are we supposed to pressure them to make a decision that makes us feel happy? A decision that needn't have any scriptural basis whatsoever, but it's just about satisfying Jehovah's Witness culture. Oh, we have this culture that women can't wear pants at the Kingdom Hall. I don't have any verses from the Bible to show you about this. Sorry, Cecilia. But if it takes me a year of shoving illustrations in your face and pressuring you, I'm damn well going to make sure that eventually you capitulate and stop wearing pants to the Kingdom Hall, because I'd rather you not do that. So which is it? I think what Jared Lope's Warwick Bethelite actually meant when he was telling Jehovah's Witnesses to let their Bible students make their own decisions, I think he meant to a degree, or don't necessarily force the issue straight away. Reason with them and give them some kind of time to get their act together, but don't be too forceful. I think that's probably what he actually meant, but that's clearly not what he said. He's giving the impression that when you study with Jehovah's Witnesses, you are in control and you are free to make your own decisions, which, if you think about it, is quite disingenuous, considering that there will be many sat in the audience who've been invited to the convention who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses, and they are being fed this false narrative that they're in control of their own decisions if they were to study with Jehovah's Witnesses.
patiently wait on Jehovah to provide clarification when we struggle to accept a certain Bible teaching. Now, why is that the mature thing to do? Well, Matthew 24, verse 45 says that Jehovah appointed a channel to provide spiritual food at the proper time. Now, I'm sure we would all agree that babies don't care that there's a proper time for food. Babies demand food on their timetable. In contrast, we show our spiritual maturity when we take in spiritual food from Jehovah's channel on Jehovah's timetable.
Did he just accuse any Jehovah's Witnesses who refuse to accept adjustments to the organization's teachings of being babies? I think that's what we've just seen there. So this, in case you're wondering, thank you, by the way, Jared Lopes, who is, I think it is actually Lopes. He was introduced as Lopes, although it wouldn't surprise me if his name was Lopez. But Lopes, Lopez, whatever his name is, his first name is definitely Jared, and he is a Bethelite from the Warwick, New York headquarters, giving the talk, "There is an appointed time for everything. Spiritual growth takes time." This is a fantastic example of manipulation through, it's kind of gaslighting, isn't it? If you are not accepting adjustments that have been given to you by the governing body, in other words, new light, new understandings of teachings or new ways of doing things within the organization, if you're not accepting what's being said by your leaders, then it's because you're not mature enough. You haven't grown spiritually enough. You're kind of like a baby. So the mature thing to do, if you have a conscientious difference with something that the organization has just come out with in terms of its new light or its teachings, the mature thing to do is to bury your head in the sand and wait on Jehovah to clarify things in his own sweet time. That's the attitude you need to have as a Jehovah's Witness. Just forget that you have any questions or disagreements and spend the rest of your life in denial.
We all face obstacles to spiritual growth.
Foul. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Foul. Oh man, that was clean. That was a foul. That was a foul! My dad's angry. I'm angry. I want to change. I just feel stuck. I'm just like him.
I'm really sorry, Ben. But you don't have to be like him. You can choose who you're going to be.
It just feels like I'm losing a battle.
You know, my dad always says, you're not losing as long as you're trying. Be patient with yourself. It will take time, but you can do it. You already have an idea of what's at the root of your struggle.
Each time you lose your temper, write down what happened, how you could have reacted better, and why.
Come on!
Wait before reacting. Take a deep breath. Colossians 3:8. Put away wrath. Proverbs 16:32. The one slow to anger is better than a mighty man. Slow to anger. Don't worry about it, man. Sorry about that.
You really kept your cool out there. Good job.
So now we're watching the concluding 2 installments from the dramatization shown to Jehovah's Witnesses on the Friday morning symposium titled There is an Appointed Time for Everything. We're following the story of Xavier and August, that's the father and son, and August's friend Ben, who apparently has anger issues. I'm sure due in large part to the fact that he comes from an extremely dysfunctional family. His father apparently has huge anger issues and is constantly shouting at his mother. Again, there's a very strong indication that there may even be some kind of domestic violence situation going on there, but that whole thing just gets completely glossed over in this dramatization. And in this particular installment, we're focusing on Ben's anger issues. Apparently, the only way to deal with anger management is if you are in the Jehovah's Witness religion. Because not once is Ben pointed in the direction of mental health support. Nobody says to Ben, hey, have you considered seeing a therapist? You know, have you considered speaking to a counselor, someone who can help you deal with these anger issues? Instead, he gets a text message saying, hey, check out this Watchtower article. This is going to fix everything for you.
I'm moving. That's great. Thank you. You know, SK might happen someday, but I'm really excited to be serving where the need is great now.
It's amazing how you can knock on one door for so long and Jehovah opens another.
We have one last announcement. We're happy to announce that Brother Ben Leal has been appointed as a ministerial servant.
See you tonight, Mom. Dad.
Enjoy Kingdom Ministry School. What is important is not our time, but Jehovah's time. What I want may not be what Jehovah knows I need. The assembly had a lot of great parts today.
Thank you for your part.
I didn't have a part.
I'm not talking about up there. I mean your example. Your concern for others, how you contribute in any way you can, and how you always make time for Jehovah, for me, and for Mom. Yeah, you had a part. Today, when they talked about helping others, the whole time, you know the one person I was thinking about? It's you. You helped me grow spiritually. You never stopped helping me.
If we're in too big a rush to get somewhere, we can miss what Jehovah is giving us right now. There's beauty in the journey along the way. And while we're waiting to reach our goals, let's be grateful for the opportunity, the time to grow spiritually. Hello?
Hi, Xavier. After the circuit overseer's visit this week, the elder body has some good news for you. Good to see you when I meet with you before the meeting.
Ooh, looks like someone's in line for a promotion, albeit a promotion inside the Jehovah's Witness organization, which isn't really a promotion. You're just doing work for free. So that's it, really. That's the end of this series of dramatizations, again, being shown to Jehovah's Witnesses on the Friday morning of their convention. It's been a 4-part series dealing with some fairly inconsequential themes. I mean, I guess you could say anger management is a theme, and dealing with being in a dysfunctional family is a theme, but the whole issue of potential domestic violence in Ben's family was completely glossed over. And when it came to anger management, the solution was, oh, read this Watchtower article and apply what it says, and you'll magically stop being so angry. No guidance to seek out mental health support. So even in the serious issues that they've addressed in this 4-part dramatization, they've missed the mark, really, in delivering a satisfying response. And this other issue of essentially ambition within the Jehovah's Witness religion to climb higher, to pursue your goals, to gain privileges. How is that interesting? I mean, bear in mind, there will again be people attending this convention who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses. They've been invited, they're sat in the audience, and they're thinking, what on earth is Kingdom Ministry School? In case you're wondering, Kingdom Ministry School is essentially a training course that elders and ministerial servants are occasionally asked to go on, that will school them on various issues that come up in a congregation. The one to do with elders might, for example, remind elders to only contact the branch office and not contact the police if they hear about child sexual abuse. That's what Kingdom Ministry School is. But how are you supposed to know that if you're sat in the audience and you've been invited and you're not a Jehovah's Witness? All of this is so incredibly irrelevant. It's kind of a niche of a niche of a niche. And it really feels like the makers of this convention, the writing department, the teaching committee, they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel when it comes to finding stuff that they can depict in these glossy productions.
David didn't listen to his men. Instead, he took advantage of the situation to show that he wasn't a rebel and that he didn't seek revenge for Saul's unfair and cruel treatment. That took self-restraint. It also required faith. Faith that Jehovah would correct matters in his own time and way. His thinking is reflected not only in what he said to Saul, but also in what he wrote in Psalm 57. Verse 3 of that psalm says, "Jehovah will send help from heaven and save me. He will frustrate the one snapping at me." We at times may find it difficult to exercise patience, especially when we're suffering unjustly. Often, we can do little to change things. But what if an easy way out presents itself? We should be like David, who first considered Jehovah's viewpoint. Sometimes we should act, but sometimes it's best to wait for Jehovah to correct matters in his due time.
Sometimes it's best to wait for Jehovah to correct matters in his time. This is the advice from governing body member David Splain. He is handling the item Dramatic Bible Reading, David Waited on Jehovah. It's essentially an analysis or a review of verses in 1 Samuel related to King David, and particularly his running away from King Saul and the various opportunities that King David had to exact vengeance on Saul, where he exercised restraint. And for me, the message here couldn't be clearer. Jehovah's Witnesses are again being told that they should be wronged and allow themselves to be treated unjustly and not look for an easy way out. That's the culture within this organization. An easy way out could be phoning the police because you've just learned that your child or a child is being abused. That would be an easy way out. But is it the correct thing to do according to the organization? An organization that wants to protect its reputation. Wouldn't the organization prefer you to contact their legal office first and find out whether reporting is mandated within that state or country? You can understand why this organization has such an obvious and overwhelming problem with child sexual abuse when this is the sort of advice and counsel they are weaving into their convention.
Let's begin with our first question. Just how patient is Jehovah? Well, God's patience is seen in his response to problems. For example, early in man's history, Satan boldly accused God of being a liar. The devil also challenged God's right to rule and also his way of ruling. God's response? Well, rather than becoming provoked, Jehovah exercised some 6,000 years of extraordinary patience so that the moral issues that were raised by Satan the devil could be resolved once and for all. Another example is in the time of Noah. In Genesis chapter 6 and verse 6, it states that mankind's wickedness made God feel grief and sadness. But what was Jehovah's response to the wickedness? Well, instead of promptly becoming upset, Jehovah displayed his wealth of patience by tolerating the situation for 120 years. Later, God patiently tolerated the sins of the Israelites for some 1,500 years. In that and many other ways, God has shown that he is supremely rich in patience.
We've just been listening to Ramon Heinz, who is a Bethelite from the Warwick, New York world headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses. He's delivering the final talk on the Friday morning with the theme, treasure the riches of God's patience. And in this particular part of his talk, he's trying to make a convincing argument for God being a God of patience. In other words, wouldn't it be hypocritical if God were to demand that his followers be patient when he's not patient himself? There must be examples in the Bible of where God has been patient, and hey, here I found 3 of them for you. On another issue, I find his way of talking incredibly irritating and infuriating. It's almost as though he's trying to model his style of talking on that of Stephen Lett. He's kind of like a black Stephen Lett, isn't he? In just this really slow, cumbersome speech style that's laced with all of these kind of raised eyebrows and that sort of thing. Very, very irritating and distracting and infantilizing. And as I've said repeatedly, the infantilization has utility in making you feel like you're a child, making you feel like you're somehow dependent on the wisdom that's being given. But let's just focus now on those 3 examples of patience. The first example is, of course, the 6,000 years since Adam and Eve. 6,000 years of patience. God has been really, really patient in tolerating 6,000 years of humans suffering and dying and being in pain, all because his authority was questioned and Satan apparently lied about him. Yeah, thank you for that patience, oh Lord. What's interesting, and I've made this point before, but I think it bears repeating, is if you actually go to the verse in Genesis, you find the following to be very dishonest.
Early in man's history, Satan boldly accused God of being a liar.
Did he, though? Did Satan accuse God of being a liar? I've done this before. Let's do it again. Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. Now the serpent was the most cautious of all the wild animals of the field that Jehovah God had made. So it said to the woman, did God really say that you must not eat from every tree of the garden? That's a question. It's not a statement, it's a question. And you're entitled to ask a question without it being a lie. At this the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but God has said about the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, you must not eat from it. No, you must not touch it, otherwise you will die. At this the serpent said to the woman, you certainly will not die, for God knows that in the very day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and bad. So Satan is there saying, you're not going to die as a result of eating that fruit. Instead, your eyes will be opened, and you will become like God, knowing good and bad. Then if you scroll down to the end of Genesis 3, let's pick up in verse 22, Jehovah God then said, here the man has become like one of us in knowing good and bad. Now in order that he may not put his hand out and take fruit also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. With that, Jehovah God expelled him from the Garden of Eden to cultivate the ground from which he had been taken. So actually Satan was telling the truth. God didn't like the idea of Adam and Eve knowing good and bad and eating from the tree of life. In other words, having all of the things that he had, both the knowledge of good and bad and eternal life. So he expelled them from the Garden of Eden, which is after the conversation that Satan had with Eve. Satan wasn't to know exactly what conversation God was going to have and what decision he was going to make. So there actually wasn't a lie, and it's dishonest of Ramon Heinz to repeat this nonsense, that there was a lie to begin with. But even if there was a lie, even if Satan had lied about God, why do millennia of human beings need to suffer because someone's told a lie about God? Would be my question. Anyway, so example number 1, 6,000 years of patience since the Garden of Eden. Example number 2, 120 years of patience before God brought about the flood of Noah's day. Example number 3, 1,500 years of patience with the Israelites. So 6,000 years, 120 years, and 1,500 years. I want you to keep those spans of time in mind as we jump to later on in the exact same talk with the exact same speaker, because he's about to contradict himself.
Yes, God's patience is a precious gift. The riches of God's patience has allowed for millions of people the opportunity to come to know Jehovah and to reach out for the hope of salvation. And yet, if we're honest, rather than being a blessing, God's patience sometimes might appear to be disadvantageous. In fact, that leads us to our third key question. What might cause us to view God's patience as inconvenient, even detrimental? Well, when we or those who we know are experiencing intense suffering, we may wish for Jehovah God to flip a switch, to press a button, as it were, and bring the new world, and bring it now, Lord. In fact, that is why we're talking about this matter. When we find ourselves thinking that way, it may be that we have allowed an important fact to escape our notice. Well, what fact is that? Well, the Apostle Peter explains in the preceding verse. Do you note there at 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse number 8? Note what he tells us. However, do not let this escape your notice, beloved ones, that one day is with Jehovah as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. Did you note that? This verse shows that Jehovah views 1,000 years as if it were a single day. Well, according to that way of figuring time, an 80-year-old person has only lived about 2 hours from Jehovah's standpoint. If you're 40, you've lived an hour. 20, 30 minutes, and you 10-year-olds, 15 minutes for you. Why is that? Well, the Bible says at Psalm 90 and verse 2 that Jehovah is from everlasting to everlasting. His life extends everlastingly into the past and into the future. Therefore, Jehovah has a truly unique view of time.
And this is a truly unique example of Jehovah's Witnesses contradicting themselves in the same talk. I can't believe the audience was just laughing along with this and not spotting the glaring contradiction. This guy wants to have it both ways. Is he even trying at this point, would be my question. Is he even trying to make his talk make sense? I mean, granted, he's reading from an outline. These aren't his words. These are words that have been passed to him by the teaching committee. He's just talking mouth for the organization. But he's just gone to great lengths to argue for God being patient due to these immense spans of time, 6,000 years since Adam and Eve, 120 years before Noah's flood, 1,500 years with the Israelites, and now he's completely undone that reasoning from earlier in his talk by saying, well, let's remember that 1,000 years are like one day to God because God is eternal. So when it comes to your frustration with Armageddon not coming yet or seemingly delaying, let's just remember that God actually is being patient because 1,000 years are like one day. Well, by that logic, God clearly wasn't patient in these examples of extraordinary patience that you've just given us, because it's actually 6 days of patience since someone told a lie about God in Eden or challenged his authority. It's a few hours of patience in the case of Noah's flood, 120 years. And it's a day and a half of patience with the Israelites. You cannot have it both ways. And yet this guy, who again just doesn't even seem bothered about contemplating what he's saying and making sure everything matches up, everything squares up logically. This guy just wants to have it both ways. But that wasn't the only appalling reasoning in this talk. We were also treated to this nonsensical argument.
The riches of God's patience has allowed for millions of people the opportunity to come to know Jehovah and to reach out for the hope of salvation.
Anyone who's been a Jehovah's Witness for any amount of time has heard this argument again and again and again. It's not that God is delaying in bringing Armageddon. He's just allowing more time so that more people can learn the good news and become Jehovah's Witnesses, and therefore they'll get an opportunity to survive Armageddon. Kind of like when the door's coming down, the big slab of rock is coming down in Indiana Jones, and Indiana Jones just kind of manages to roll through at the last minute and grab his hat. You know, these people who we're preaching to have a few moments just at the end of this dying system where they get to survive thanks to the preaching work, which is only possible due to God's patience. That's the logic you buy into as a Jehovah's Witness. But it doesn't actually make sense when you look at the global population, which has just been ballooning over the last 100 years or so. Let's take, for example, the year 1914, which is supposedly when the last days began. The global population in 1914 was 1.7 billion. So we start off with 1.7 billion on our planet in 1914 at the beginning of the last days. Let's just pluck another date from thin air. 1975. What was the global population in 1975? 4 billion. Approximately 4 billion people were living on our planet in 1975, when Jehovah's Witnesses were predicting Armageddon to come, or at least hinting very, very strongly that 1975 would be a date of significance prophetically in the outworking of God's purposes for mankind. Fast forward to 2023, and the global population has ticked over 8 billion. So there is double the amount of people on our planet now than there was in 1975. So with every passing day, with every passing week, with every passing year, there are more and more people for Jehovah, the patient God, to slaughter at Armageddon.
God knew long beforehand that the Canaan's inhabitants were headed in the wrong direction. Yet, he patiently waited or allowed 400 years to pass before their error reached what Genesis 15 and verse 16 referred to as its full measure. The Canaanites' full measure of error included idolatry and degraded sexual practices. They were also notorious for their bloodshed and cruelty, which at times included burning children alive in sacrificial fires. Well, when the sin of the Canaanites reached its full measure, the point where all hope of improvement or reform or correction was gone, Jehovah brought them to their end.
Do you mean he had them massacred in a genocidal rampage? I think that's what really happened, according to the Bible. So we're again listening to Ramon Hines, Warwick Bethelite, giving the final talk on the Friday morning of the convention, Treasure the Riches of God's Patience. This is an odd line of reasoning to embark down, because he's just tied us all in knots by first of all claiming that long spans of time in the past are evidence of God's extraordinary patience, then claiming that 1,000 years is as one day to God, so we need to have God's view of time, in which case thousands of years are just a few days of God being patient. Now he's telling us that Jehovah was patient with the Canaanites for, 400 years, which is a few hours, according to God's view of time. And he's trying to justify this grotesque portion of the Bible where the Israelites conquer the promised land and do so by slaughtering its native population. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 7, where it begins, "When Jehovah your God brings you into the land you are about to enter and take possession of, he will also clear away populous nations from before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations more populous and mightier than you are. Jehovah your God will give them over to you, and you will defeat them. You should, without fail, devote them to destruction." So don't just ask them to move. Don't just kind of turn up and say, you know what, we're in control now. We're giving you a deadline by which you need to leave. Otherwise, we're going to slaughter every man, woman, child, domestic animal. No, they were supposed to go on this murderous rampage. And I think when you are reading the Bible, even as a believer, you struggle with these passages because they are not describing a God of love or patience. They're describing a genocidal maniac whose punishments far outweigh any crimes. I mean, in terms of crimes, Ramon has been listing there things like idolatry. Oh, so you mean them practicing their religion? He's also talked curiously about human sacrifice, which is another interesting subject I've dealt with recently in a video on Bible contradictions, thumbnail here if Tibor is gracious. Because when you do a bit of digging on this, you find that the Bible, despite speaking out against human sacrifice in 1 or 2 places, also has a very disturbing affinity for it. So here are some verses I dug up when I was researching for that video. Genesis 22, 1 and 2, Exodus 13, 1 and 2, Exodus 22, 29 and 30, Leviticus 27, 28 and 29, Numbers 31, 40 and 41, Judges 11, 30 to 40, that's the story of Jephthah's daughter, John 3:16, and Romans 3, verse 25, which all pay lip service or promote or prescribe some form of human sacrifice. Now, if you like, we can zero in on one of those examples, which is actually the example I read in the contradictions video, Exodus 22, 29 and 30. I couldn't believe when I read this, again, only relatively recently. It was there all along when I was a Jehovah's Witness, and I probably read it countless times, but I never put two and two together. You must not hesitate to make offerings from your abundant produce and the overflow of your presses. The firstborn of your sons you are to give to me. This is what you should do with your bull and your sheep. 7 days it will continue with its mother. On the 8th day you are to give it to me. Now, as a Jehovah's Witness, we jump through all sorts of hoops and say, well, elsewhere in the Bible it speaks out against human sacrifice. So probably when it's talking there about the firstborn of your sons, maybe he goes off and becomes a monk or something. Maybe he just goes to work at the temple. Maybe he goes to work as some kind of priest. Well, only the Levites got to be priests. And when you actually read it in context, it's talking about the firstborn of your sons, and then it immediately goes to bulls and sheep. Now, when bulls and sheep were given to Jehovah, it wasn't so that they could be in some kind of animal sanctuary. It was so they could be slaughtered, because the God of the Old Testament was obsessed with blood and gore, with animals being killed and slaughtered on this altar that had horns, with the horns of the altar being dripping with blood. It was all about death for the God of the Old Testament. And in this verse, he is including the firstborn of your sons you are to give to me. I think I know what that means, again, in the context of what's being described in that verse. So it's curious that the Canaanites are being singled out as these monsters who were worthy of genocide because, among other things, they practiced human sacrifice, when in actual fact, if you do a bit of digging, I promise you there are verses in the Bible that prescribe the exact same thing for the Israelites.
How can you and I show that we treasure God's patience? Well, the answer to that question, for that answer, we invite you to turn again to 2 Peter chapter 3. But this time, when we turn to 2 Peter chapter 3, we're going to apply Peter's inspired words to two distinct groups of people, namely those who have not yet been baptized and those who already are baptized. That's 2 Peter chapter 3, and this time we'll read verse 11. There we read, 2 Peter 3:11, "Since all these things are to be dissolved in this way, consider what sort of people you ought to be in holy acts of conduct and deeds of godly devotion." So you see, this verse urges us to consider what type of or what sort of people we ought to be. With this in mind, how can a person who has been delaying baptism show that he treasures God's patience? Well, such a person would do well to ask himself, how much longer will I delay reforming or correcting any conduct in my life that displeases God? Verse 11 indicates something. Do you note there that it mentions dissolved? This word dissolved, as one translation renders it, this dissolved is rendered disintegrated. Well, that word denotes objects that will be broken into small particles. In other words, destroyed. What will be dissolved, broken into pieces, disintegrated? Well, the previous verse tells us If you look there in verse number 10, Peter was referring to what he mentioned as the elements. The elements. Well, in other words, this system of things, including any person who, as our publications have described, is incorrigibly wicked. Now, the dictionary says that an incorrigible person is one who cannot be reformed, cannot be corrected. Thus, if you have not yet dedicated your life to Jehovah and been baptized, 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 11 lovingly is urging you to treasure God's wealth of patience by bringing your conduct, your deeds into line with His holy will, and do so without delay.
Is it just me, or did we just hear a long-winded death threat from Ramon Hines, who is a Bethelite at the Warwick, New York World Headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses, here giving the final talk on the Friday morning of the Exercise Patience 2023 convention. His theme, Treasure the Riches of God's Patience. He's just read a verse in 2 Peter 3 talking about the elements of the system being dissolved, and he's gone to great lengths to explain how that actually means disintegrated, broken into small particles, destroyed. And rather than talking in terms of governments or institutions or, I don't know, armies, he's gone straight to people. People who displease God. People who are incorrigibly wicked. They won't be reformed. They won't be converted to Jehovah's Witnesses. If you're refusing to get baptized, if you're delaying getting baptized, you're being incorrigible. You're refusing to reform your ways, and you are therefore worthy of being dissolved, disintegrated, broken into small particles, or destroyed. Charming, isn't it?
I enjoyed learning about Jehovah and the paradise, so at an early age I came to love Jehovah. Yet later on, doubts just started nagging away at me. I was deeply troubled by all the horrible pain and suffering I saw on the news. Even though I knew and understood the sovereignty issue, I kept asking myself, why is it taking so long? I even started feeling a distance growing between me and Jehovah. I did a lot of praying and studying during that time. Mark and I also had many deep and meaningful conversations. Then I saw a picture in the publications of a father carrying his little son on his shoulders. That really resonated with me. I wanted that same kind of trust that a child has in his father. To feel that I could trust Jehovah without asking questions. It became a real struggle between what I mentally understood and what I was feeling emotionally in my heart. I remember earnestly praying to Jehovah so that I could feel things as Jehovah feels them. At a certain point, an elder came to visit us. He specifically asked me, "Edith, how are you doing?" His interest and concern just made me open up and tell him what I was struggling with. I remember he quoted a scripture. It was at 2 Corinthians 10, verse 5, where it says we must bring wrong thoughts into captivity. I came to realize that our way of thinking is often so limited Jehovah sees everything. He takes all factors into consideration. As a result, those negative feelings couldn't grow and get stronger. Now I could focus on positive thoughts. That was the turning point.
Think happy thoughts, Edith. That's going to be the turning point for you. Bring wrong thoughts into captivity. We've just been hearing from Edith Millen, a Jehovah's Witness from Belgium. She's sharing her testimonial as part of the 2023 Exercise Patience Convention program. I've watched this footage 2 or 3 times now. The first time I watched it, I honestly found it quite dull. And with each progressive watch, because obviously I've been preparing this rebuttal, each time I watch it, including when I was just listening to it now, just before filming these very comments, it gets more and more chilling. And I notice things in what she's saying that disturb me anew or afresh. And especially when she says,
I wanted that same kind of trust that a child has in his father. To feel that I could trust Jehovah without asking questions.
I wanted to be like a child. I wanted to feel like I could trust Jehovah without asking questions. So Edith is shaming herself for daring to ask questions. And what were these questions? Well, we heard earlier that she had doubts due to the suffering that she was seeing when she was watching the news. She was looking at the misery, the suffering, the death that's taking place around the world. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's good stuff happening around the world as well. But let's be clear, at all points in human history, there has been misery and death and suffering. Edith was looking at this and failing to reconcile what she was seeing with an all-wise, all-knowing, all-powerful God just sitting back and folding his arms and watching it all happen because of the sovereignty issue. In other words, God's power and authority and position in the universe was more important than whether children were dying, than whether there was pain and suffering. Thousands and thousands of years of pain and suffering wasn't as important as God's sovereignty, as God showing everyone who's boss. She was having understandable doubts about that. And her epiphany was in realizing that as a Jehovah's Witness, it was her duty to become more like a child and stop asking questions.
What reward is promised to both the anointed and the other sheep? Well, verse 7 tells us, did you note? It says, everlasting life. See, this is a reward that is far greater than any material, financial benefits we might receive in this system of things. Even if it were $1 billion, nothing can replace everlasting life. And why can you and I be certain that this applies to us personally? Well, because verse 6, did you note those words there? It says Jehovah will pay back each one. Not just his people as a group, rather each one according to his works. So then, do you have a good imagination? Personally, I love the way the Watchtower once put it. It said, picture all the interesting things or fields of science that will open up to someone who is not restricted by time. That's a good point, isn't it? Because frankly, you and I, well, we're impoverished when it comes to time. We just never seem to have enough. But then the Watchtower went on to say, imagine all the fascinating places there will be to explore and all the interesting people there will be to meet. Try to grasp the endless possibilities to conceive, create, and construct things. And then I love this last point. There will be no limit to the opportunities. Think of that, brothers and sisters. How well will you sing in the new world? What kind of artist will you become? How well will you dance there? How fast will you run? Will you swim with dolphins? How well will you cook in the new world? How well will you eat there? Well, only time will tell. In the future, when we will live as long as Jehovah lives, our concept of time will more closely match his eternal perspective. So much so that the time that we spend in this system of things will seem momentary. As we eagerly await that time, may each one of us be ever more determined to treasure, indeed to value, to appreciate, to highly esteem the riches of God's patience.
Thank you, Ramon Hines, for those concluding comments, bringing to an end the Friday morning session of the 2023 Exercise Patience Convention. What he's essentially been doing there is what I call carrot dangling. If you think about it, it's just another form of manipulation. So he's trying to remind Jehovah's Witnesses why they are giving up and sacrificing so much autonomy, so much freedom, so much ability to just make basic decisions for themselves, so much of their time and energy. He's reminding them that at the end of it, they'll have all the time in the world because they're going to have everlasting life. They're all going to become brilliant singers and swim with dolphins.
How well will you sing in the new world? What kind of artist will you become? How well will you dance there? How fast will you run? Will you swim with dolphins?
Hey, if you think about it, you'll be able to swim with sharks as well, won't you? Just have a big old cuddle with a shark, because it's not going to want to bite you anymore, because there will be no carnivores, there will be no predatory animals, either in the oceans or on land. Everything's just going to be munching away at vegetation. The sharks are just going to be chewing on seaweed. The lions and tigers are just going to be eating grass. Poisonous snakes are going to find something else to do with their venom. It just gets ridiculous, more and more ridiculous, seemingly every year. Every year at these conventions, they do this carrot dangling where they depict paradise in some amazing way, or they go into specifics with these depictions regarding what people can expect to enjoy. And it was either in last year's convention or the convention before where they were showing people sailing around in yachts. There are going to be shipyards, apparently, and fiberglass hulls in paradise. Goodness knows where all these materials are going to come from. So there are going to be yachts in the paradise. There are also going to be smoothies. I remember that was another one. They showed not just the fruit tables, you know, which is just typical now for Jehovah's Witness artwork. You always have the fruit tables with the watermelons, but also smoothies. And now we're learning that we're all going to be able to sing like Celine Dion. And we're going to be able to swim with dolphins as well. So, look, buy into this if you want. I'm sure there are many people who would gladly trade their freedom to think critically, their freedom to decide for themselves how they live their lives, what clothes they wear, what entertainment they watch, what books they read. They'd be glad to trade all of that for this fantasy, this check that can never be cashed, of living in this utopia. But even if we grant that this utopia is going to happen, and decades of Jehovah's Witnesses, generations rather of Jehovah's Witnesses, have lived and died without seeing any of this fulfilled, even if we grant that this is going to happen, at what cost? Because we've just heard this same clown talking about people who don't get baptized being dissolved, disintegrated, broken into small particles, destroyed. So picture yourself with your imagination, as Ramon would put it. Use that imagination. Think about frolicking on the lawn with the pandas and with the lions, or the lion cubs, the tigers, you name it, grizzly bears. Think about frolicking on that lawn with that fruit table nearby. And just think for a moment about what's underneath the lawn, a few feet underground. Think about the billions of bodies, the billions of men, women, children slaughtered for the crime of not being Jehovah's Witnesses that this utopia, or rather dystopia, has been built on top of. Anyway, on that grisly note, thus concludes my review of the Friday morning session of the 2023 Exercise Patience Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm going to get stuck in straight away to preparing the next rebuttals, most pressingly the Friday afternoon rebuttal, but I hope you found this rebuttal interesting. Don't forget that you can watch more in this series by subscribing to the Lloyd Evans channel, but for now, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for watching.